Welcome back to another TINAH Talks episode. Today we are talking about Movember because it's November and it's a big thing talking about men's mental health. And so we wanted to bring this to the conversation. So I'm your host, Kelsey, and today we have a guest. This is JP. JP, can you give us a little introduction?
Yeah, I'm JP Marsh. I am a 41-year-old single father to a 9-year-old girl dad, and been doing the co-parenting thing for 7+ years, 5+ years, really well on good terms in a healthy way, and you know it's being a single dad and going through the breakup and all these different things. Mentally it gets a little exhausting because you kind of feel like you're stuck in an uphill battle, I guess. Most men anyway. I mean, depending on the situation, the circumstances, how involved court systems get, all that kind of stuff. And then, we're coming into November, which is the holiday season, and with the added stress on, a lot of fathers only getting their kids maybe 6, 8 days a month. Now you got to deal with, you don't get to spend Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween, New Year's comfortably and pleasantly with your kids or your family because everything's a big chaotic mess getting shuffled around and pushed here, pushed there, timeline, time limit, competition with the other parent, and all these different things. And so, that's kind of what I deal with.
Yeah. No, I mean, so are you like 50-50 custody with your daughter?
We're not tied into the court system because we were never married. And so
Okay.
my daughter comes and goes as she pleases. But the rules at my house are the same as at mom's house. And if she's grounded there, she's grounded here. The food's the same, this and that. So we don't get pitted against each other. And it's not a deal where I can get away with murder here. So I'm going to spend all my time there. Plus, we live in a small town, rural area. We're like 6 blocks away from each other. It's not that big a deal to just run over there
Ah,
and pick her up if she wants to come and
yeah.
eat dinner with dad or go back to mom's or whatever. Da 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 da. And we have a loose schedule that uh so my daughter's in a blended family now, and her stepbrother, her schedule is a reflection loosely on what his schedule is. So when they have
Yeah.
one of them, they have both of them all weekend, and then neither kids, weekend free the next weekend, more or less.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, if she wants to go over there and it's not her weekend or whatever, if they're not doing anything and mom says fine, then fine, and vice versa for me. But it's kind of loosely based around that schedule.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And before we go down like too weird, because I know we're going to get into the meat of this in the episode, I'm a product of divorced parents, and it
Hmm.
was a nasty, nasty divorce. My father was the first man in our county to actually get custody of his child. So my dad
Oh.
had primary custody of me.
Hmm.
And we ended up having a little bit of that blended family thing happening, but at the same time, um, both of my parents, for background, I know some of the listeners have listened, they struggled with alcoholism, both of them, but my dad was more of the functioning one. And with my mom, I had to have specific visitation with supervision and all that because she couldn't be alone with me. And there was always these fights and pushes and pulls and who's going to have this for what holiday. And so I mean I can speak to it from the child perspective, and then
Hmm.
also just seeing like how my dad, you know dealt with a lot of things. And both of my parents, I think they didn't know how to cope with their emotions, and like their mental health was not the greatest, and they ended up coping with alcohol.
Right.
And that's ended up what my father died at 56 from end stage liver failure because of that. So I like my whole life I really got to see the trajectory of how that presented for him. And now, as someone who worked in the field and my own experience with mental health, I can see how little mental health support he had. Um, and also, I think because of that generation, the unwillingness to get support just out of like kind of what the social atmosphere was around all that. Um, But this is why I think things like Movember was created. So, just for our audience who isn't familiar, Movember is a month-long event that takes place in November where men, in particular, they grow mustaches to raise awareness and funds for men's health. This can be anything from cancer to mental health to other physical issues. And so, we wanted to do an episode on TINAH, specifically, obviously, on men's mental health, because there are, there's a lot of, I think it's still very stigmatized, even more so. Mental health in general is stigmatized, but for men, I feel like it's even worse because there's a whole different nature around that. And as a man, I
Right.
don't want to speak to it, but
Well, it is. It's the, the whether, it's as a man, the way that you perceive the societal views of men is to shut up and just get back to work. You know what I mean? And you're not allowed to have emotions. And if express wants, needs, desires, boundaries, preferences, or anything like that, it's okay to shame men for having feelings or being vulnerable or not agreeing with something. You know what I mean? Like the whole toxic masculinity thing, and you could go down a rabbit hole with all this stuff, but that's the general perception that men live by and a lot of guys live by is I'm not allowed to have feelings, show feelings, and everybody just tells me to quit whining, be a man, grow up, stop crying, go to work, provide, go to work, and
yeah,
that's your job. And that's your role in society, basically. Go build the roads, go
yeah,
build the houses, go work in the oil fields, and quit crying about your broken leg, your broken arm, your hurt feelings, or whatever the case may be. And I think you know for me at least, I grew up in a so my dad got sober when I was young, but that was
oh,
so I grew up
interesting,
in the AA system, never
yeah,
a real big drinker or anything like that, but I grew up in a really emotionally disconnected place. And even knowing, I had an older brother and it was me, I grew up as in the forgotten child, middle child syndrome, atmosphere because I didn't demand a lot of attention, but my brother did. So I had this whole, nobody wants me, nobody cares about me. I'm kind of in invisible mentality
hmm,
and an emotionally disconnected household. And, nobody was in really, emotions just weren't really a part of my childhood. So then when that got in my teenage years and my 20s, then that's when it really started getting with the self-destructive behaviors, the numbing with alcohol, the feeling of worthlessness or not being able to, not worthy of love. So then obviously it's one toxic relationship after another because I fed on the excitement more than the connection or more than the intimacy or more than the honesty, you know what I mean? And so it just kind of kept
yeah,
rolling like that. And then when my daughter was born, early 30s, then it became a, you know, oh shit, I need to change. I don't want her to grow up in the same kind of place with the same kind of baggage. So then the more that I worked on my baggage and helped, healed from my childhood, then the better the relationship with her mother got as we were trying to co-parent, and then being aware of all these things and trying to break generational curses and not, you know, pass down the trauma that has been
yeah.
in my family for generations, you know what I mean? So making a conscious effort to kind of not has been one of my points, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's really incredible. And first and foremost, thank you for sharing a little bit of your background and your story. It's not, and I'm sure it happens, but I don't think it's as often talked about. So it's not heard of as much. But like hearing your story of recognizing that you were on a path that was not only self-destructive and not great for you, but like you had this tiny little child that you're like, now
Right.
I need to do something different and I need to protect them. And I know you hear the horror stories. I'm one of them, right? My parents had me, but they couldn't get their shit together because I
Right.
was in their world now, right? Um, and so I really commend you for that. I think it's even without a kid, just as an individual human being, it's really hard to take a look at yourself and be like, I have to change some shit. Like stuff
Right.
is not
Right.
going well, like I'm not doing myself a service. I'm doing disservice to other people, right? And there's like a very, I don't know who said this. It's a very famous quote, but like, the trauma is not your fault, but the healing is your responsibility. Um we live in a tough world where
Right.
like no one's going to come and save us. Like we are not someone, our emotions and our mental health and our mental well-being is not someone else's responsibility. um and time, this is why we have teen time doesn't heal things, right? It just
Hmm.
maybe creates a little bit of distance and distraction. But that stuff gets stored in our body, it gets stored in the stories that we carry with ourselves, and then it gets stored and comes out in the behaviors that we have every day. um
Right.
so I mean, is now like you've made these decisions, have what did you engage in to try to get yourself back onto that track? I know it's been a little while and you're in a better place than where you
Right.
you were before, but when you started to really identify this and wanting to make the changes, how did you go about doing that?
Well, I mean, sort of, I, I, I started listening to a lot of books on Audible. I don't sit down and read near as much or hardly, but I listen to, 60, 80 books a year on Audible because I drive a lot for work and I don't watch TV. So, I'd rather just learn, I guess. But as that started kind of propelling and I got more into the, changing your perception, your mindset, you know, the reality that you choose is the reality that you have. One of the big things was is breaking the internal dialogue that everybody else had been telling me my whole life and then stop
Yeah.
believing that dialogue. You know what I mean? Like for a lot of years I drank and drank and drank and just used the excuse because everybody was always like, well, your dad's an alcoholic, so you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic, da 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 da. But like I don't drink now, but I'm not in recovery. And like I can, you know, go out once or twice a year and like have a beer or, a beer with dinner or something like that. And it's not that big, it's not a conscious effort and it's not something I have to white knuckle or anything like that. But when I stopped believing what everybody else had always said that I was an alcoholic because my dad was an alcoholic and all these different things. And then once that had happened, then I realized that you could do that with everything. And then, you're the average of the five people that you spend the most time around. So if you want to be a good parent, be around other good parents. If you want to be in a toxic relationship, then hang out with people that are all in toxic relationships. You know what I mean? You're going to be the sixth, no matter what area or group that you join. So being conscious of some of those things is always helpful.
Yeah. No, I think I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think the once we gain self-awareness that something's not right and we want to make a change, it's about educating yourself on like how can you make those changes or what sort of changes can you make? And so I love that you brought up Audible books, because I know a lot of people who are just not into reading. Like reading
Right.
is not always a big thing, or they don't have time for it because life is happening. But I think that's a really great resource for people to start kind of getting some education and some perspective shifting, outside of themselves and outside of the people who are in your normal environment. Um, I think that can really help build that resilience and like shift the mindset of what you have about yourself. Um, while you were talking, it was making me think about like my dad and like, I witnessed him. It was so weird because as someone who he was very angry a lot of the time. So there was
Hmm.
a lot of anger, alcohol. He could carry around a cup of vodka with him all day. You would never know he was drunk, but it shifted his personality. It made him an asshole.
Right.
But I was his prize possession, I guess you want to say. Not
Right.
that he like, possessed me, but he loved me deeply. And so it's a really juxtaposition because he actually, and his words, he said this to me, like he wanted to raise me like a boy so that I had that like hard skin and that I
Right.
could, survive in the world, which is very odd because I think what he needed in his life was a little bit more softness and knowing how to be
Right.
soft, and that being soft is okay. And if you want to talk about that masculine, that feminine, like knowing how you can be in your masculine, but also accepting the feminine. And with him, I saw most of his emotions come out via anger, but I did actually
Right.
see him cry a number of times. And in a weird sense, I'm really grateful that I got to see that side of him, because now, like, as I see men in my life now, right, I come from the psych background, so I'm all about emotions and talking and all that stuff.
Right.
I I want to encourage that and say, like, that's normal and that's fine. And I just think that, like, my dad really, there's things that happened to him when he was younger, and comes from a religious home, so there was not a lot of open conversation around things. Um and the home was very competitive, so there was always, and I think this is
Hmm.
a big thing for men, like, you have to produce, you have to
Right.
be the financial provider of everything, and you always have to show up, and you have to, like, basically be on top of it all. And I think that adds an a huge pressure, that, like, when you're struggling to take care of yourself, now you are struggling to be this financial, like, stability to provide not only for you but your family. That's this added pressure, and money was a constant issue in our household, and I think that was, like, the ongoing downfall for my dad, because he he continued to drink about it, right? But
Hmm.
he instilled a lot of, like, I could see how he wanted to change his mindset, but he
Right.
himself couldn't do it. Um, and it's just seeing it as a juxtaposition, how, like, you noticed it and you, like, took the steps to do it. And I love that, like, education was a part of that. Did you ever, like, engage in things like journaling or breath work, meditation, therapy, like any other kind of activities?
Yeah. I mean, I journal. Well, I have like a gratitude journal that I've been doing. I started doing mindfulness training like 5, 6 years ago, and then the gratitude journal, and then there's also another one, a journal that I kind of do, not so much now, but I did for a while. And like when I talk to other people that are in higher conflict co-parenting type stuff and this and that, like being intentional, like training yourself to get out of the pity party. And like, I never say that, I never call my daughter's mother my ex. You know what I mean? Like changing your
Mm,
terminology and changing the way that you view things around you changes the way that the perception is. And so like, she's my daughter's mother, that's who she is in this reality. You know what I mean? Like, we're a team raising a child. If I wanted
right.
to stay in that pity party with the anger and the animosity and the hurt feelings and all that stuff, then sure, I would continue to call her my ex, and she won't be, on this journey in this new reality, and I could be stuck in the past and do all these pity party stuff. So then once you can kind of shift it a little bit and start, with the mindfulness and stuff like that, then I started being intentional. Am I replying or am I reacting? You know what I mean? Is this competition or my hurt feelings? Or is it something like like you see it a lot with people that are split up. And it wasn't necessarily a huge issue that I had to overcome, but like, you tend to see a lot of competition between parents. Who can do the best vacations, who buys the best Christmas presents, who does the best da 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 da, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or and then on the other side, the one that, way to go, dad, I could only take him camping this summer, but you're taking him to Disneyland, or vice versa, or you know what I mean? And it's like, well, if you weren't stuck in this pity party place, you would be happy that your kid gets that experience instead of,
Yeah.
oh, well, they're other parents doing it, like, feel sorry for, you know what I mean? But you get stuck in these routines, and once I
Mhm.
once I started being intentional in all aspects of my life and started really being able to look inside, I guess, and heal from my childhood, then it was easier to just not feel sorry for myself all the time. And then
Yeah.
when you start
Did
feeling
you
sorry for yourself, then you gratitude journal, and then it kind of goes away. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think, right, I mean, like, your feelings are valid. Your experiences
Right.
happened, and the feelings are real, and you have to feel your way through them. But at the end of the day, like, you can't change the past, right? So it is
Right.
really all about how can you process in a different way, and then, like, moving forward, are you going to bring this forward in a way that you're going to be reactive and defensive? Um, God, I wish my parents learn the shit that you learned and how you're applying it with your partner, because mine was the complete opposite. They could
Right.
not say a kind word about one another, and I was the filter for that. So like
Right.
they just constantly complained and bitched about each other to me. And they just, and it wasn't even so much like competition stuff, but it was like, I went years without insurance because my dad couldn't afford it, but he didn't want to let
Right.
my mom know because like she could have paid for insurance for me. And it was just like these little petty things about who has one leg
Right.
up on one another, or to make sure the other one can't report something on the other. And it was never, between the two of them, it was never about me and my interests, and
Right.
that was really clear. And it sucks because they could have, I look at it now as an adult, like I've had to do a lot of my own healing and processing
Right.
and things, and
Right.
I I feel really bad for both of them. And my mom has also passed. She passed last year from like a combination of cancer and liver failure. And like I just feel really bad. They never got to like live a happy good life because they
Right.
they clung to old emotions and narratives that they didn't know how to let go, and that they coped with in the wrong way. And um yeah, I'm curious, and I know you said you've done some journaling. So when you say you've like, processed some of your trauma in the past and trying to like let go of those narratives, have you done that just from like, have you like spoke to people about it, or have you done writing about it, or like how have
Yeah.
you kind
I'm
of
in both.
processed through it? Okay.
Well, a lot of internal work and a lot of, I listened to one book pretty early on in my deal, in my self-healing type stuff. And I listened to it like at least once a year just to, you know, just cuz. And,
Yeah.
once I could honestly sit there and just accept the fact and forgive and give for, be have forgiveness and just, my parents did the best they could with the tools that they had. And that's all you can ask for, you know what I mean? And, is my daughter going to have baggage? Yeah. Every kid's going to have baggage because nobody's perfect. And you might say something jokingly that they'll take 30 years before they, confront it because
Hmm.
the uncle at the family reunion said something about one of the kids being pudgy, and then now they are a weight issue for the next 25 years. I mean, it's hard to, you know what I mean? You don't know where somebody else is, how they're going to take something. And so,
Right.
spoiler alert, every parent screws up their kids. The trick is to try to limit it. You know what I mean? If my daughter's able to confront whatever baggage she has when she's 20 and work through it and then have the rest of her life be happy, then I succeeded and that's great. But it's once you can, just forgive people, because it's more for you than it is for them. But you know, white knuckling it most of my life, blaming everybody else, feeling sorry for myself because my parents weren't like everybody else's parents or whatever, whatever, whatever. I wasn't doing anything except just keeping me in that place, you know. And
Hmm.
it's, my parents weren't necessarily in a place where they were disconnected more so than like argumentative or anything like that, you know what I mean? So like, but with the co-parenting deal, it's a little bit, I had to be really intentional. And whether or not my daughter's mother ever said stuff or her family says stuff around my daughter or whatever, that's out of my control, so I don't even worry about it, you know what I mean? Even if it's
Right.
happening or not, there's nothing I can do about it, and so I don't even really think about it or worry about it. I'm a firm believer that my actions will always outshine whatever words somebody else has. So if I'm at every soccer game, every school function, every drop off pickup, never late, always there, always there, always there, always there, the only person that it matters to is my daughter. She sees who I really am, and the rest of them can, talk as much shit as they want to because it's all fucking words. But when you get two people doing it, sort of like your parents, I early on could recognize the fact that if I bought into that and engaged in that kind of stuff, every kid thinks that they're 50% mom, 50% dad. So if you're talking shit about the other parent, you're sitting there talking shit about your kid to your kid. And that's
Yeah.
how they're going to take it. You know what I mean? Well, dad hates half of me because I'm half mom. Dad hates, I look like mom. So, she's ugly. He says she's ugly. So I must be ugly. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
it's a pretty slippery slope when you start, unintentionally hammering on your kids for their entire lives. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
I'm sure that was some of the stuff you kind of had to work through if that was the realm that
Yeah.
you were raised in.
Yeah, I had this really weird juxtaposition where have you ever heard of Pavlov's dog, the study? Have you heard of that?
I
Where
think so.
yeah, basically like he did a whole experiment where he had like he would feed the dog food. Every time he would feed it food, it would salivate, and when he would feed the dog food, he would ring a bell, and then eventually he started stop giving the food but just ringing the bell, and then the dog would salivate. So he was
Right.
creating this reactive behavior, right, based on some sort of trigger. And
Right.
with my parents, my dad was mainly my person in my world, so
Hmm.
I could see from a young child, my mom, she could have a beverage and I could immediately tell she'd been drinking. So like I could see that from a young age. It took me till I was about 14, 15 to realize what was going on with my dad because it was more secretive and hidden. But like
Right.
also, I grew up in I was in his house, but like water was always shut off, heat was shut off. Like we were not eating the best of food because like, or we didn't have
Right.
food because money was an issue, but these were all hidden things. And if I spoke to either one of them, I'd get her angry and yelling at me about things that he did, and I'd get him angry and yelling at me about things that she did. So he and I would get in arguments and stuff. But on the other side of it, my dad was also very like positive and encouraging. So he was
Hmm.
like, you need to learn how to learn. Now, granted, did he go about instilling some of these things in the wrong way? 100%. There was a little bit
Right.
too much physical abuse, things like that to like make a point, stuff and certain things. But like
Right.
I I step into those leadership shoes because he nailed into me and make me repeat, I'm a leader, not a follower. I'm a leader, not a follower.
Right.
He would remind me that I was beautiful and that I was smart and that I just needed to learn how to learn. I struggled in school when I was younger, and like he really pushed kind of militant style how he pushed me to like study
Right.
and do things, but he made efforts and he showed up in ways that a parent should show up to a certain degree. And so I had this juxtaposition with him that even though I have a lot of bad memories and he was an asshole a lot of the time, I know my father deeply loved me, and
Right.
I loved I loved him. And like when he died, not to say it wasn't less hard when my mom died, but it was a different scenario. Like he was
Right.
my core parent. My mom, on the other hand, she did have a hard time showing up. And my dad, I later learned, was he made it very, very difficult for her. He like dragged her through
Right.
court for everything. He that there was some back end things that was happening that like I didn't know about. And so it has, as an adult, I've had to sift through a lot of information and a lot of open loops that I'm never going to be able to close. And
Right.
um I think what you said about, right, our parents do the best they can with what they have in the moment. It's taken quite a bit of therapy, a lot of journaling, and my own experience to like go out and live in the world. And actually, we discussed before this when I said that I left to go travel.
Hmm.
One of the big reasons why I left, and I went across the world to Australia. I was going to go somewhere else, but I wanted somewhere English speaking just because I was nervous going
Right.
by myself. Big part of why I wanted to is I wanted to disconnect from a world of everyone I knew with the societal demands that were expected of me. And I did the things. I went to school. I got the big girl job. I paid off all of my debt. My parents at this point were doing their own, well, my dad had passed at this point.
Right.
And my mom was doing her own thing. And so I was like, okay, this is my window. I want to go and I just want to be in an environment where no one knows me. I have no expectations put on me. And like, who am I? Like, how am I functioning and existing in the world, and what do I like and what do I don't like, and what is all
Right.
this outside of the context of me constantly having to manage and take care of my parents.
Right.
And that was, I know not everyone can do that, but that was a big part for me to like really accept, because I think you can say, our parents did the best they can with what they have, but until you truly like feel that in your heart and you understand it, you have even like you have deep empathy for that and you truly forgive them, until you feel that, you can't let go and move forward. And it's hard to
Right.
change the narratives or question the narratives that you have that you're like, huh, this is something that like I think I developed from my dad or I developed from my mom. Is this
Right.
something that I like want to continue to carry forward? Is this supportive to me or should I change it and do something else? Because I have my own autonomy and I have the ability to change that perspective.
Well, yeah, yeah. And I mean, you go through, I went through and spent probably a solid 6 months, journaling or writing or figuring out, same kind of deal as maybe going on a big trip or traveling like you did, something like that. But like I kept pretty accurate. I kind of tracked what I did, day in, day out, habit wise for like couple months. And
Yeah.
then went through and figured out what serves me, what doesn't, what I liked, what I didn't, what I wanted to continue, what I didn't want to continue. You know what I mean? Like, does drinking
Yeah.
alcohol do anything for me? No, it makes me fucking feel like shit. I wake up and I don't feel good and I'm moodier and I'm depressed because it's depressant and da 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 da. If I'm go over here and do this and I'm day drinking or have a few beers, then if my daughter calls me, I can't pick her up, then I'm the drunk piece of shit dad and I don't want to be that. Da, 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 you know what I mean? So then alcohol
Yeah.
goes away. Or, like not that I ever smoked weed or really got into anything like that, but drugs, pills, and same kind of deal. Is it serving me or is it not serving me? Then I don't want it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Do I want to get wrapped into massive debt? Do I need a brand new pickup to keep up with other people that I know or the neighbors or blah 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 blah? Well, no,
Yeah.
because I don't give a shit. You know what I mean? I like my pickup. I don't want to have a car payment, and it gets really good fuel mileage, and it does everything I need it to do. So why do I want to pay $900 a month for something I don't even want?
Right.
Do I need a huge house? Do I need 4 bedrooms? No, it's just me and my daughter. What the fuck do I need a big ass house for? You know what I mean? Do I want
Yeah.
20 acres? No, I don't want 20 acres because I don't want to maintain 20 acres. You know what I mean? And
Yeah. That's a lot
like
to maintain.
there's all these things that you can do, but like, do I want to? No. You know what I mean? Is it going to serve me? Is it going to bring me peace? Is it
Yeah.
bringing me fulfillment? And if it doesn't bring me fulfillment, or I don't think it will, or if it's not, helping me grow as a person or helping my income, or it's not a hobby of mine, or it's not a relaxation of mine, then
Hmm.
why do it? You know what I mean? But I was also, you know, it it, it took me the hardest thing for me to break was the the feelings of the forgotten child or unwanted or having to do more to prove, to be worthy of love kind of mentality made me a very um agreeable person, and always said yes and always committed to things, and then was constantly burned out because I didn't actually want to do any of these things. So I was always going and going and going and around all these people and doing all these things and doing for people and doing for people, and sort of, being taken advantage of by most not healthy relationship type people, or not really friends, you know what I mean? Just acquaintances, and
Yeah.
constantly giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. And it took me a long time to break that. And that probably served me the most, as far as the peace and the well being and, you know, mental health, because I wasn't burned out all the time and I wasn't filled, wasn't constant in this burnout feelings of taken advantage of and
Hmm.
overextending myself.
Yeah. Boundaries, basically. Like you learned
Yeah.
what were the boundaries you needed and then how can you actually put those into place and feel okay about it, right? Especially if like with the forgotten child syndrome, it probably feels like a part of you, you're hurting a part of yourself because you're no longer agreeing to what you think you need to agree to get the love that you want.
Right.
And so then you feel like, oh God, by putting this boundary no one's going to love me or want to be around me or engage with me, and that can be really really hard.
Well, I had to be okay being alone. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Because until I
Yeah.
could until I could be which I'm fine alone. You know what I mean? There's big difference. I have conversations with my daughter about it a lot because she, you can tell she worries or whatever, and it's like there's a huge difference between being alone and being lonely, and I am not lonely. And being able to be alone makes it easier to find and connect with authentic relationships that are healthy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need to jump
Yes.
from dating this girl to dating this woman to dating this woman, because I can't be alone, even knowing one's a drunk, one's a drug addict, one's a toxic, spiraling mess. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to deal with all that because I'm okay being alone if you're
Yeah.
not sort of okay, then you just jump from toxic relationship to toxic relationship, and that's not necessarily the model I want to have for my daughter. That's what adults do. It's just go through constant chaos, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. We need more dads. We need more men out in the world who are, to follow in your shoes and who are open to talking about it and all of that. And so I'm loving it. I feel like we could do like a whole nother podcast and talk even more about stuff in detail.
Oh, probably.
No, yeah, probably. And I would love to have you on again. I mean, I think everything that you're saying is really powerful. We didn't even really get into like the nitty gritty of maybe some of the darker emotions and mental health things that maybe you experienced at some point, but it sounds like you recognize things weren't well and what were the behaviors you were doing to cope with it weren't great. And then how did you
Right.
move forward out of that? And I think that in and of itself is super powerful. Um, I think when it comes to, right, so men's mental health and all of that, well, first off, I just want to go back. You said there's a book that you read every year. I'm sure the listeners want to
Hmm.
know what's the book.
The body keeps the score.
I have it on my shelf. I haven't read it yet.
It's
So
like, I
you
mean,
hear
it's
that,
like
guys?
22 hours of a read on it's
Okay.
like 22 hours long on Audible. It's a big, but it kind of put, I don't know, for me anyway, it put a lot of things in perspective, you know, like, but it more or less helped me accept a lot of things from my childhood. Just that my parents, you know, like everybody did the best that they could, and nobody
Yeah.
knows what they're doing, and everybody's kind of floundering and doing what they know from what they learned in it. You know, it helped me to kind of take a bigger step back and realize, like, you know, even my interpretation of how my parents were, but my interpretation of how their parents were to them was a lot worse than they, you know what I mean? Like they had were more emotionally available and stuff like that than all of their parents were to them, and the situations that my parents grew up in. And then, you know, you go
Yeah.
back a couple generations and you realize that it was, you know, far worse. Not that, you know, your body, you know, you can justify trauma. Oh, mine wasn't as bad as this person because this didn't happen to me. But, you know, your body doesn't necessarily, and your subconscious doesn't differentiate trauma's trauma. You know what I mean? Like the
No.
fight or flight is just the emotion, you know, physical response. So if you're
Yeah.
stuck in fight or flight and can't regulate it, then you're not going to, it's a long, dark road of, you know, substance abuse or self-destructive, numbing addictions, you know, toxic relationships. And so that book was probably one of the bigger ones that helped me get through my own
Yeah. No,
mental
I love.
stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I love that. I'm glad I remembered to ask because I like you said it and I was like, oh, is he going to say it? Is he going to say the name of the book? And then you didn't. So I wanted to come full circle. I do have one more question for you, but
Mm-hmm.
before we start kind of wrapping things up, I think, right, just to let people know, especially for any of our male listeners, right, like what are some of the ways that we can take action and find support? And I just want to touch on, right, you need to recognize those signs. And I think it's becoming more and more open. Things like Movember and
Right.
all over social media and all of that is there's more open conversations. TINAH Talks, we're having more in-depth conversations about this. And I think that's a good place. And I think something that you touched on is giving yourself the education you need to learn a different
Mm-hmm.
perspective. So if you're not ready to like dive deep into journaling or meditation or therapy, something as simple as like audiobooks or reading to kind of shift that perspective, to get a little bit of an outside view, I think is a really good first step. And then from there, there is therapy, there are journaling techniques, there are breath work or meditation or, all of that good stuff. Um, this is just a friendly reminder. We do have on our site, and we'll include in the show notes, the National Suicide Prevention Line, which is 988. I believe that's both for like US and UK. There's also mentalhealth.gov. And then specifically for Movember, I think the big thing that people are doing, like in honor of this, for people like, right, if you're not someone who has a mustache, but you shave and you do a mustache, it starts a conversation. And people are like, nice mustache. Why'd you do that? And you can, take it all sorts of routes, but you like, it's in honor of Movember to like open up conversations around men's health. I did it because of mental health, right? And, to
Right.
open those conversations for people. And that's like a nice little way to do that. And I know Movember in particular, they have like, I don't know if I think they have fundraising events, and then they have donations that you can do and things like that. And you can partner up with them for things. So I think their site is us.movember.com. So if anyone wants to check that out, they can. But I know you kind of talked about the body keeps the score. So I ask all of
Hmm.
our guests this. What is your go-to like top 1 to 2 coping mechanisms that have been a game changer for you in managing your mental health that you'd recommend to other people, specifically men in this situation?
Uh, Meditating. Um, I probably listen. So like I found that the Headspace app to be, the guided meditation deal to be really helpful. And then I also listened to his book, which is the guide to Headspace, probably like once
Okay.
every other month or something. It's like a 6 hour audiobook, but it it goes through like the approach, the actual doing it, the integration into your daily life, and then obviously it's got a bunch of his stories. He was a monk for 10 years or something, and all that stuff. And so that being a part of my morning routine, having that morning routine, having that nighttime routine was probably one of the most beneficial things that I could have done. Waking up earlier, having my time, whether my daughter's there or here or anywhere, whether I'm out of town, it doesn't really matter. I wake up early, I have an hour, hour and a half to myself, so I can do my meditation, I can drink my coffee, I can journal a little bit, I can wake up, do my stuff, whatever I need to do, and then everybody else starts getting up, and then we can start doing the breakfast and start the daily chaos and get ready for work, get ready for school, do all that stuff. Um, Finding other like-minded people that are trying to do the same thing. I'm not the biggest fan of social media, but if you use social media for the reasons that it exists, it's helpful because you can find the people that are like-minded that are trying to do the same thing that you want to do on Instagram and Facebook, and find these groups and find these communities of people, and they don't need to be in your community. So, for instance, a place like me where I live in a town of 6,000 people that doesn't have a town bigger than 20,000 people within 250 square miles, you may not find more than a handful of people that are trying to be on the same sort of path that you are. You know what I mean? But with the internet,
Yeah.
obviously you can find huge communities of people that are supportive and can help you. I've reached out to just random people over the years, sent them messages or DMs or whatever, and just like, hey, this is, mentally where I'm at. I see that you might be a couple years ahead of me in the same sort of journey. Like, how do this is something I'm hitting pitfalls or booby traps with, or stumbling over. Like, what did you do? And most people
Yeah.
are totally willing to help you out and give you advice. And but to me, I grew up in and around the AA system where you had sponsors. You know what I mean? And that was
Yeah.
the culture of a lot of my childhood. You were helping somebody 3 to 5 years behind you on the same journey that's going to hit the same booby traps, you know,
Yep.
mental, stuff like that. And so, being intentional, being mindful, journaling, learning, growing, talking, you know,
Yeah.
the less you talk about it, the more that it's just spiraling in your head and you're on a hamster wheel of just the constant, well, tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow will be better. And, I'll start
Right.
tomorrow and I'll start tomorrow. So
Yeah. And as we know, time doesn't heal. So
no, no,
no. Yeah. Well, JP, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing information, sharing your story, all of that. This has been a wonderful conversation. So for
mhm.
all of our listeners, we'll put, JP's information into the show notes and all of that. And as you guys know, we will see you guys next time for another open and honest conversation around mental health. Thanks. Thanks for coming, JP.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the TINAH Talks podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe. And if you love what we're talking about and are ready to start changing your life through your own healing journey, follow us on our socials at Time Is Not a Healer.
The TINAH Mental Wellbeing Marketplace is now live and ready to help you take control of your mental health. Head over to timeisnotahealer.com, where we'll provide you with the best toolkit for your self-healing journey.
All of the details can be found in the episode description below. Remember, you hold the power to heal. Until next time, you've got this.